So we're now facing a situation that we're potentially about to start handing control of a monopoly supplying drinking water to 15 million people in London to even increasing more chunks to the Chinese government. Have we all lost our minds or something? What in God's name's going on?
Tell us about the march.
Tell us about the march.
Well, listen, these things have always got very humble beginnings, and in my case it was getting very angry about a piece of river I loved and loved immensely to this day. And I've always tried to take I hope a reasonably straightforward approach to most things, particularly when there's a problem. And I would like to think I approach people along the basis of as grown up and compassionate as I can. There's the problem. There's what I think we need to do to fix it. And all I actually want back, whether it be government or friends or colleagues, is an equally grown up pragmatic response. And if I don't get that, I then become the other Feargal, as I refer to it. And the other Feargal is the one that finally got to the point, you know what, there's no point in talking about this anymore. I've spent 4 or 5 years talking to water companies, government regulators. It's fundamentally been a huge waste of time. Everybody knows there's a massive issue involved here. Nobody's prepared to really face up to it and deal with it. So I'll just unleash the other Feargal for a bit. And hopefully we're going to put as many people and as much of humanity as possible on the streets of London on Sunday.
And so people know, where can they meet and when, Feargal?
Down on the Albert Embankment, on the South Bank, slightly unusually. Because again, just... people often think that the music industry spends a great deal of time finding young creative people and nurturing and developing them. No, we don't. Young creative people find themselves. Yeah. What the music industry does is go and tell everybody else about it really, really well.
Yeah.
And the British music industry is exceptionally well. Now, I know a lot of protests start in Hyde Park, walk down Piccadilly. That to me always seemed like a really boring background. And I've always had this image in the back of my mind of humanity crossing Westminster Bridge from the South Bank with a drone shot with Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament in the background, and anti-establishment, anger, frustration, outrage, and this tsunami of outrage crossing Westminster Bridge with Big Ben in the background. That's the much better picture.
And it's true. And crossing over one of our great rivers.
Yes.
Of course.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's
River Thames.
This is what it's all about, isn't it? The state of our waters.
Well, I can give you an idea. I was out on a Tuesday morning up in a little tributary of the Windrush, just outside Whitney in Oxfordshire. Now, the little tributary, the Colwell Brook, flows into the Windrush, flows into the Thames at Oxford, comes all the way down to London. Even up there, the output from one sewage treatment works, it failed for ammonia. The levels were toxic to fish and to invertebrates. It failed in nitrate. That was 4 times, getting on for 4 times the threshold for harmful levels of ammonia. And in terms of phosphate, it was double the level for harmful levels of phosphate. And that's just one sewage treatment plant. And by my calculation, there's over 200 odd sewage plants in the Thames Valley alone, all cumulatively adding to that already toxic soup. And it all comes trundling down through the middle of London, through the heart of a G7 member state, the 6th largest economy on the planet.
So, Feargal, really? I reckon most people will now be aware that all is not well in the water supply. And we all know this horrible stories about sewage and so on. But can you give us a sort of beginner's guide to how this happened?
Well, the simple truth is, and it isn't an argument about nationalisation versus privatisation, but I think what everybody can agree on right now is this particular privatisation has utterly failed.
This was in 1989, right?
1989. It was the last of the great Thatcherite privatisations. And in fact, Jonathan Portes writes in this edition.
Yeah.
Jonathan was a young Treasury official at the time in the inside, watching what was going on. And I'm paraphrasing. There was a desire, as it was the last of the privatisations, that it would be massively oversubscribed. That idea that we could all own a piece of our own lives and society and structure, that everybody would own a share in a water company, and those shares were deliberately pitched really cheap. So by the end of the first day of trading, because they'd been sold so cheaply, to ensure it was oversubscribed. It turned out the city and the markets had made a massive killing on the first day, i.e. the Treasury and the taxpayer had been massively shortchanged for political ideology and dogma. And very quickly the venture capitalists moved in and they realised that there was a massive weakness in the regulatory system. And I'm not speaking out of school at this point. I think we all know that Ofwat, the economics regulator, and the Environment Agency, the environment regulator, have utterly failed to protect both us as consumers and our rivers. The casebook example at this point in time, again, it's all out there, was Macquarie taking control of Thames Water, instantly loaded the company with £10 billion worth of debt. That was been coming off a holding company based out in the Cayman Islands. The UK water utilities company then, of course, is required to pay back interest, which I believe was somewhere about 16 to 20% a year on that £10 billion loan. And because it's an intercompany loan, here in the UK, those interest payments are tax-free.
Right.
Now, exactly what happened to £10 billion, that's a good question, because my suggestion would be it was actually paid back to the shareholders by way of dividends.
Yeah.
So not only have we paid through getting on for over 20 years worth of profit in advance, we've also then saddled the company with £10 billion worth of debt, which we're earning huge amounts of tax-free interest on, which we get the offshore out into the Cayman Islands.
Do the two regulators, Ofwat and the Environment Agency, Feargal, do they have the necessary powers if they were minded to use them?
Absolutely they do, and I've been asked that question 1,000 times. My normal response is anybody that can think of one single bit of authority, statutory wealth, weight, regulatory assistance they need, feel free to raise their hand, because I, for one, will lead the charge in lobbying government for that update in the law.
Yeah.
Nobody can answer the question. Ofwat has, which is referred to technically, Section 18 powers. In essence, and again I'm paraphrasing, it's a clean sheet of paper. Ofwat can order any water company to jump in any way it wants, to circle around the building any time they want, to say 7 decades of the Rosary or 5 Hail Marys. And if the company concerned does not comply, Ofwat then has the legal authority to fine them up to 10% of their annual turnover. Do you think actually laying down the law and dictating this is what we need you to do this year, next year, and for the next 5 years, and if you don't comply, we will take 10% of your annual turnover away from you until you satisfy us you're behaving yourselves? I suspect if they exerted that authority alone, that would help focus a few boardroom minds.
So just to make the point, because you make it in your excellent piece about why you're doing all of this in the New European.
Yeah.
You say if you're caught fly tipping down some B lane and
you're going to jail.
You're going to jail, right?
Absolutely. Proceeds of crime applies, and that bit of the agency seems to know how this works.
If you're caught polluting our rivers or failing to invest in sufficient standards to make sure that our water is clean and fit for purpose, nothing happens.
I can give you an example.
Please.
This year alone, a company like Severn Trent, if I remember correctly, has this year alone already been fined £2.6 million for illegally dumping sewage. What happens? If you're the chief executive, if I remember this correctly, has just been given an annual salary bonus of £3.3 million.
God, extraordinary.
How the hell does that work?
How does it? I mean, well, what's you're steeped in this. You're super smart. How does it work?
Because the simple truth is the regulators bottled it.
Right.
Now, they will argue, and there's some justification, that under previous administrations, the bonfire of the Quangos, yes, every regulator was massively constrained, huge hit in the budget. In the case of the Environment Agency, it turned out, little did we know at the time, in 2015, the then Secretary of State for DEFRA and in control of the agency's budget had a bit of a dry run. And being the good disciple of Frederick von Mayak and the Chicago School of Economics that she was, Liz Truss further decimated the Environment Agency's budget because clearly regulations to start the operation of free markets, and she had a dry run.
The golden touch. It strikes again.
So the truth was, Rory Stewart tells this fantastic story, and I am paraphrasing it a bit again, but to illustrate, he's in his office because he was the Minister for Water. And Liz appears in the doorway. Rory, I want you to cut the Forestry Commission's budget by 20%. Just that was it. No rationale, no science behind it. No, we've analysed all of the costs and expenditures and efficiencies and everything else. No, I just don't want you to do this because I had lunch with some businessmen that told me you can cut any organisation's budget by 20% and it'll make it more lean, more efficient, more driven, more focused. Rory pushes back and eventually, minutes later, okay, make it 10%. And then Rory pushes back, if I remember correctly. And after another few minutes, Liz goes, okay, you know what? I'll make an exception for you this time, Rory. You don't have to do it. And off she went.
Yeah, brilliant.
So you got a three-way collision of ideology, regulatory weakness,
correct,
and greed.
Correct.
Which leads to shit in the water, basically.
And some of the greatest financial minds in the world trying to figure out how they could structure and operate those companies that utterly maximised what the Companies Act requires of the directors, that they maximise the value and the return to the shareholders. And by the way, the environment's not our responsibility. What happens to customers' bills in 10 years' time? That's not our responsibility. That's what the bloody regulators there to do. So the biggest thing that's actually now people are really locking onto is London is now on the cusp of running out of drinking water.
Which is amazing when you say it.
It is an extraordinary thing for me to be able to say, to the extent that for readers outside the UK, just 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of State for DEFRA did this whole big piece in one of the national Sunday
This is Steve Reed, yeah?
Yeah, Steve Reed, in the Sunday Express, focusing purely and exclusively on the utterly perilous state London's water supply is now in. We've got about 10, 15 years worth of water left. And then we run out of water. And according to the National Infrastructure Commission, that alone is going to cost 60 billion quid just to keep London's taps running. And that's in today's money. And I'll take a wild guess, like all good public spending, capital expenditure programs,
it might slip a little.
It'll cost three times that by the time we ever get it done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is bonkers that I can sit here and go, London is now on a list, along with Cape Town, Jakarta, Sao Paulo.
It's in the top
Mexico
10,
City.
isn't it, I think?
It's number 9.
Number
number 9 city in the world most likely to run out of drinking water. Oh, and by the way, we had this highly regulated, apparently market-driven, really efficient system in place for the last 33 years.
Paging J.G. Ballard or any other dystopian writer.
Exactly that.
And we'll be facing rationing like they do in Barcelona habitually now. All sorts of punitive measures. And again, the point being that it's us, the people at the bottom of the tap, who end up paying. Meanwhile, the profits keep rolling in. The dividends keep rolling in. The bonuses keep rolling in.
The last estimate I have, water companies have now made off with about £82 billion worth of our money.
It's amazing.
They've saddled those companies about £64 billion in debt. Thames Water, in my opinion, is basically bankrupt and has been for some time.
Yeah. And
in the outside world is now teetering in this perilous world where, to get slightly technical, the people who own 66% of Thames Water shares have now devalued them as nothing, as worthless.
Yeah.
That's the Ontario government. Here, the USS pension fund here, the Queensland government, the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund. 66% of Thames Water shares are now valued by the owners as worthless.
Yeah.
S&P and Moody's, two of the three great global corporate rating agencies, have devalued the debt, Thames Water's debt, to junk status. It is now officially classified as speculative, i.e. if you buy any of this debt, you're going to lose your money.
Yeah.
And in fact, this week, a matter of 48 hours ago, S&P have further devalued down into an even lower rating of junk bond status for Thames Water's debt. And they're out there right now claiming they need to raise 3 billion quid before Christmas, and they're offering 8%. Now, for those of that don't have the background in these things, in the modern world, somebody offering you 8% just to get you to lend them some money, they've already told you it's a complete and utter basket case.
Yes.
Do not go anywhere near
They're
it.
saying subprime.
Yeah, it's just an extraordinary situation we're in.
Why, can I ask an obvious question, I guess? I mean, just compare it to something else like Michelle Mone, for instance,
Yeah.
Who is, I think, in my view, rightly labelled as a COVID profiteer,
Yeah.
and has been on the front page of our newspaper and many other newspapers, and is held in contempt for her actions.
Yeah.
And the public have got a very clear view of her. We don't really know the names of these people who've taken these, not just millions, but billions out of our pockets and ruined our water system.
Well, I can help you with that one. In the case of Thames Water, you can start with the Chinese government, who own 10% of Thames Water.
Right.
Now, Thames Water earlier this year defaulted on a £490 million bond. They're potentially about to default on another one. So by Christmas, they could potentially, I think, be somewhere in the better part of £1 billion worth of bonds that they simply can't repay. They just don't have the cash. Now, I'm told in the earlier bonds, one of the biggest that was reported in the media, one of the largest creditors in the first bond is the couple of the Chinese state banks. So we're now facing a situation that we're potentially about to start handing control of a monopoly supplying drinking water to 15 million people in London, to even increasing more chunks to the Chinese government. Have we all lost our minds or something? What in God's name's going on?
Well, just to bring it to some sense of purpose as well, what are we marching for on Sunday? What should happen?
Well, the simple truth of the matter is what we're marching for is somebody to actually start doing their job.
Right.
If I own up, we have in this country a thing called chalk streams. They are the result of a complete and utter geological freak about 80 million years ago, when London, where we're sitting, was actually somewhere down the equator and was actually the seabed of a very shallow ocean. And it was that geological freak that gave birth to this thing we know as the Chalk Ridge. People outside this conversation will know it as the White Cliffs of Dover. They will know it as the Isle of Wight. They will know it as the carvings that were done into the Wiltshire countryside. They will know it as the Stonehenge Plateau. All of that is actually the skeletal remains of microscopic plankton that died over 80 million years ago on the bed of a shallow ocean somewhere down near the equator.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, go back to the music industry and selling stuff, I knew that if I should find myself on one of the big impactful Monday morning media political programs, let's say, for example, the Today programme.
Yeah.
I've got the 8:10 slot on the Today programme.
The big one.
And that's the big one. If you want something to happen in Whitehall, get the
That's the
8:10 slot on the Today programme and be devastatingly good.
Yes.
And you've saved yourself 6 months' work right there.
Right.
That's just the way it works. But the way mine works from the music industry, I can already hear the producer in Nick Robson's headset going, God, he's boring. Get him off the air. He's talking about who cares about microscopic plankton dying 80 million years ago. Get him off the air. And it was somebody tipped me off. Somebody who works in the Environment Agency, who I ran into one day and simply went, Feargal, I'm only going to say one word to you, and now you and I will never repeat this: sewage.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Now I've got the emotional engagement that I need.
Yes.
Because now I can go in the media and simply say, by the way, did you know that your local water company is dumping shit into your local river?
Your kids are swimming in shit.
Yeah.
You take your dog down and you throw that nice fluorescent tennis ball.
Yeah.
And you allow your Labrador to swim in that river. And it comes home and shakes itself dry in your kitchen. You've just now aerolized decades of shit, and it's now spread across every bloody surface in your kitchen.
E. coli-tastic.
There you go.
Yeah.
We did some testing a couple of weeks ago down in the River Severn at Worcester. The tests we did down there, we had levels 50 times above the threshold for poor bathing water. The minimal standard acceptable, the E. coli readings we got were 50 times worse than the minimum standard for even poor bathing water status.
Yeah.
That's what your kids are swimming
weird,
in.
yeah.
That's what your dog's swimming in.
Yeah.
But
That's what you're canoeing, paddling, fishing in.
But the water companies are saying well, okay, but we're skint. We haven't got the money. We can't do it. We're at your mercy. What's the right thing for Keir Starmer to do?
Oh, at this point in time, and I'm going to get slightly technical, but bear with me.
Please.
Ofwat, in my opinion, in an attempt out of embarrassment and to cover their own corporate rear end, 3 years ago, sent the water companies 2 letters. The first one reminded the water companies of their statutory obligations, which is to build, operate and maintain, and I am quoting, a sewage system capable of effectually dealing with the contents of those sewers. I.e., it doesn't matter what's in that sewer, doesn't matter how it got there, doesn't matter where it came from. If it's in the sewer, your job is to collect it, treat it and dispose of it in compliance with the law. Water companies haven't been doing that for 35 years. It's quite clear they haven't. In fact, the European Court of Justice ruled that very fact in 2012. 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So government's known for 12 years. You're breaking the law.
Yeah.
And you're allowing water companies to break the law. The second letter was the more interesting one, where Ofwat went a step further and doubled down and then reminded water companies that in the regulator's opinion, water companies have been provided with all of the funding necessary that they ever needed for 35 years to meet all of their legal obligations and to comply with the law, and that for 35 years water companies have been certifying and confirming to the regulator, yes, we know what the law requires of us, and yes, we have the funding we need to comply with the law. Well, clearly they didn't spend our money on the bloody fixing the sewage system.
No.
So Ofwat...
Sorry, I was just going to say, Feargal, that clearly Steve Reed saw you coming, as it were. So within a week of appointment, he gives a speech in which he promises lots and lots of things will be done.
Yeah.
And now there's a bill in front of Parliament, Water Special Measures Bill. Now, is it a nothing burger or is it a start or what is it?
Well, it's a nothing burger until you come to Clause 12. And I have discussed this earlier, Clause 10. I have discussed this with quite a lot of people. We're going to jail water company executives.
Right.
Actually, that's been the law for the last 29 years.
Yeah.
The Environment Agency has that power. If you in any way obstruct an officer of the Environment Agency, you are liable to pay the maximum fine and or 2 years in jail. Okay, so that's not particularly any good. We're going to hold water companies accountable, make them change the Articles of Association. They make them... That's actually been the law for 20 years. Companies Act's required that since 2006. Oh, and by the way, if I want to bring and seek remedy for a breach of Articles of Association, it's only shareholders can do that. 80% of water companies are privately owned. I can't even buy a share in Thames Water, even if I wanted to take them to court, and you have to prove loss and harm. And right at that very minute, every litigation barrister in this country, their eyes will light up and they'll rub their hands because you're about to pay not only for their own kids' education, but their grandchildren's education along with it in several generations to come. Yeah. The real sting in the tail is Section 10, and if I'm reading this correctly, what the law currently says, if there has to be a water company put into special administration, because water companies can't voluntarily go into liquidation. So if they're put into special administration, and if there has to be any kind of bailout by the Treasury, the way I read it, right now the Treasury are on the hook for every single penny of that bailout. What Section 10 of the Water Special Measures Bill does is allow the Treasury and the Secretary of State for DEFRA to collectively and directly put up water bills and to ring fence that money and ensure that that money is then paid straight back to the government to compensate the Treasury for any state bailout. I would argue that that is the point of the Water Special Measures Bill and nothing to do with jailing water company executives.
Right.
Yeah.
So to put that into layman's terms, this bill will ensure that any bailout is paid for by
water bill customers,
by punters, ordinary people.
And by the way, if it, for example, hypothetically is to bail out Thames Water, it could apply to every single water bill in the country.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure people in Liverpool, in Newcastle, and Doncaster will be pleased that they're potentially going to be subsidising a calamity that had nothing to do with them and only involves Thames Water customers.
Yeah.
Where are you on the renationalisation sort of position? Because in your brilliant piece, you kind of you have a cunning plan, don't you, of how it could be done? Because the pushback is, we can't afford. Come on, we can't afford it. No one's going to renationalise it.
Let me help you with this. There's a speculation being spread around, including in Parliament, that to nationalise the water companies could take up to 100 million quid or 100 billion quid.
Billion.
I was underestimating that. Yeah. Listen, I'm talking to two journalists here, so I'm not going to tell you how to do this stuff, but you just get an instinct to go, there's got to be something wrong with that idea.
Yeah.
And it turns out it takes all of 45 seconds to work out that figure is actually based on a report put together by a think tank, bought and paid for by 4 water companies.
The Social Market Foundation, for anyone who's wondering.
There you go. Yeah, I'm happy to say it was the Social Market Foundation. Clearly this never happened, that somebody came along, 4 water companies, we need you to produce a report with a really big scary number in it, throw in everything and the kitchen sink and next door neighbour's kitchen sink and the kitchen sink from the next street over, and they come up with a figure of 90 billion quid, which someone like Dieter Helm, one of the country's leading economists, I think Dieter referred to it as economically illiterate. Now, there's another view, and it's the one put forward by, Moody's, one of the world's largest market analyst corporate rating agencies that we talked about earlier, and Moody's put their collective heads to it. Bearing in mind Moody's future and whole business model is predicated on the brilliance and insightful analytic work they do.
Yeah.
There are billions of pounds worth of commercial decisions made every day based on Moody's analytical brilliance. Moody's reckon it would cost about 14. It's a hell of a long way from 14 to 90.
Yeah.
Now that's assuming you even want to pay for it.
Yeah.
And by the way, as Matt has just pointed out, there's plenty of ways to nationalise them without spending a penny.
And you're talking about putting liabilities onto the...
Well, you could actually right now attach an amendment to whatever bill legislation gone through the Houses of Parliament tonight. It could be the dog walkers and tree climbers bill. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All it has to say is we're amending the audit regulations. You will now declare as a liability on your balance sheet the cost of fixing all of this, including the cost of keeping London's taps running. That's it. Every single water company in the country fails the going concern test.
Yes.
They're all instantly bankrupt. They can't go voluntarily bankrupt. It all reverts automatically back to state control, and you've just nationalised every one of them, and it didn't cost you a penny.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
There you go. So it's easy done.
I'll tell you what, let's let everybody, if anyone's listening to this, their blood pressure will be through the roof right now. Let's take a couple of minutes, calm down, and then I want to come back and talk about why you're doing this, what makes Feargal Sharkey tick.
Right.
I know it's going to be a great conversation.
It is.
Feargal, you could have rested on your laurels. You could have. I'll tell you. Well, I'll tell you a little story. I'll tell the listeners a little story. When you came to our office, and you parked your car around my street because I had a spare parking permit, and we walked a couple of 100 meters, and a middle-aged guy, stopped you in the street and said, "My hero." Yeah. And I thought he was going to say, "Teenage kicks, love it," but he didn't. He said, "I love what you're doing on water." Yeah. Now, you, like I say, you could have just had a beautiful existence as a veteran rock star. Yeah. But you didn't. You took up this massive challenge. Where does that come from?
It gets very Freudian at this point, so do forgive me.
We do Freudian.
But it is. I grew up in this extraordinary household. I'm one of 8 kids. I'm second youngest. My mother was a housewife that raised 8 kids. My father was an electrician. You could stop there until I explained my father was also chairman of the Labour Party in Northern Ireland, or in Derry, in the 1950s and 60s. He was also branch secretary of his local union, and I, to the very end, would tease him that I'm still traumatised 50 years later, the first time he took me to a union meeting, and my father's alone on the stage behind green velvet table, and there's a room full of really angry men, and they're all screaming and shouting, and all trying to get my dad's attention and referring to him as Brother Sharkey. Yeah. Who the fuck are these people? I've never met any of these men. They're not my uncles. I don't know who these people are. Why are they all calling my dad brother?
Amazing.
But as it turns out, my dad actually wasn't a big politician. He was very active. But it was my mother, and she's the one who was even more heavily engaged in the civil rights movement. So there would be frequent arguments and discussions in my house. And the way I kind of slightly more literally refer to it, endless evenings of the plumber, the electrician, the unemployed, the local poet, the local school teacher, the bricklayer, all discussing how they were going to bring down the government in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And at 10 years old, I watched the local plumber and the unemployed and the housewife and the school teacher and the poet bring down the government in Northern Ireland. That's a really bad lesson to learn as a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I.e. that anything's impossible. And there was a number of other ingredients, because there's never one isolated thing. We were chatting just briefly before we started recording. You were demanded of you in my house that you had an opinion.
Yeah.
And it could actually be any opinion you wanted. But it was equally demanded, you better be able to intellectually justify it. Because if you have an opinion and you cannot philosophically explain why you reached that conclusion and reinforce it, you will be in really big trouble and you will be held accountable.
Yeah.
And when you start combining all of those things together, it becomes just completely extraordinarily life-changing thing.
Do you think that's still that observation about, okay, you better have an opinion, but you better be able to support that opinion? Do you think that's changed?
Oh, no, not at all, because I still to this day, it carried me in great stead through all of my life.
Didn't mean with you, mate. I mean, I just mean with the generation coming up. There's a lot of opinions swirling about, but when you scratch beneath the surface, there might not be the intellectual.
Absolutely, and I don't want to appear like some sort of parasite and talking about multimedia and social media, because am I a big believer that technology democratizes creativity? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just love the idea that people can go and buy, I'm going to pick on one brand because I know it well. Every single Apple laptop in the planet right now for decades has come with the copy of the thing called GarageBand on it.
Yeah, right.
It's the most extraordinary, brilliant digital recording studio. I wish I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
And discovering GarageBand for the first time, my head would have exploded. I'd have just the wondrous thousand ideas and, oh my God, how am I going to deal with all of this?
Yeah.
So an awful lot of it. But for me, it's, at some point, I guess the biggest thing that I was taught as a kid, and again, it was demanded, if you ever saw a social injustice, it was demanded that you confronted it and dealt with it.
Right.
Simply walking away was not an option. And bearing in mind that was people trying to deal with an awful lot of social injustice, particularly in Catholic Derry in the 1960s and 50s and 60s. Yeah. There was enormous amounts of it. So by that point, as a population and as a culture, my parents and their peers had made the decision. They weren't prepared to walk away from it anymore, even if that meant putting themselves physically in harm and putting their lives on the line.
Which many did. Yeah.
And many did.
Yeah, yeah.
So fast forward that, I know my life had changed. I was chairman of the oldest fly fishing club in England, called the Elmwell Magna Fishery. Shortly after I became chairman, it became apparent that there was an issue with the river. And in fact, the river, we own 2.5 miles of chalk stream out in Hertfordshire. 2.5 miles of some of the rarest river systems on the planet was turning into a stagnant pond through lack of flow. I then quickly realised maybe the members knew something about me that I didn't, and why was it they suddenly decided that A, we were going to go and have to pick a massive fight with the Environment Agency and Thames Water, and B, oh, we better make Feargal chairman. How did they ever connect? Yeah. As it turned out, we did spend a lot of time working with a brilliant charity called Fish Legal, who helped support fishing clubs take claims against and court claims and to bring action against polluters. They've been doing this for 40 years, 50 years. It's a phenomenal charity. And we eventually did get our thing sorted quite quickly once they realised that we were serious. And as I normally put it, not only was I standing on the steps of the High Court, I was leaning on the doorbell, banging furiously on the door knocker, demanding entry. That experience, however, then just made me curious as to why a fishing club with 60 men and women who just wanted to go fishing had to go all the way to taking the Environment Agency to the High Court, just to get them to do their job. What in God's name else was going on? And as I now sometimes put it, that gave me an itch. Stupidly, foolishly, naively, I scratched that bloody itch, and every time I scratched that itch, I just ended up with an even bigger itch.
Yeah.
And that made me realise this country is peppered with community groups, and groups of just really decent people. They're not militants, they're not activists, they're not out there gluing themselves to the front of buildings in the City of London. For example, the Ver Valley Society, founded in the ancient Roman town of Verelium. It is the bastion of the home counties and white middle classdom within commuting distance of London, and is the home to any number of professionals. Great education system, great schools, fantastic place to live. Yet they still felt 30 years ago to found a little community group, because even then they realised that the chalk stream, the River Ver, which gave birth to their city and their town, was being polluted and diminished and being over-abstracted and destroyed at the high altar of the water industry.
Yeah.
And they've been out there. The earliest reference I can find to chalk streams and pollution is 1989.
Right.
It's the Ver Valley Society. So these are people who've been out there for 30, 40 years, writing letters, sending emails, collecting petitions outside supermarkets, writing to the regulators, writing to the local MP, doing everything you would expect of them. And this is the bit that really galled me the most. These are decent people that put their trust in the system and the system of regulation and political oversight, and it utterly failed them, because that system, Ofwat and the Environment Agency, took that trust and treated it with contempt.
Right.
Because they've known for decades what the problem was. They've known what the underlying issues were, and they keep these people spinning plates year after year after year, because they knew they were never going to confront the big underlying issue. Their own incompetence, corporate greed, and financial engineering, and lack of political oversight.
And there's an interesting pattern here, isn't there, I think, Feargal, which is that, like with the post office case and is that there has to be now, for that kind of decency to ignite, there has to be someone or a group of people who are willing to go just that bit further.
Sure.
And that's great, and it's wonderful when it happens.
Absolutely.
But I could hear it in your voice, the sense of it shouldn't be necessary.
Well, it shouldn't be. We have this, moving into Feargal's philosophical 35 seconds.
Please.
We have developed this system of democracy that every 4 or 5 years we have an election, and we appoint those around us, our peers, who we feel are best capable, best able to look after our interests as a nation and in society as a whole, and to secure our future well-being and our longevity. And that simply allows, to quote, ordinary working people to then get on with normal mundane things like feeding their kids, putting shoes on their feet, and making sure we can all just get out there and create something valuable for future generations to come. And that whole system is reliant upon our trust. The trust that we, the electorate, put in those that we elect in the system of government, that it will go out of its way to secure and protect our future and our well-being.
I mean, you're talking about a social contract, actually, aren't you?
Exactly what it is.
And what you're also implying is that has now frayed to broken.
Well, it is desperately broken.
Yeah.
And that's why we're faced with the budget we were yesterday. We're now living in a nation where 3 million children in this country now are living in poverty.
Yeah.
2.9 million families last year had to use food banks. There are today 1 million children in the United Kingdom destitute. The definition of which is they have no security today where they might get dinner from this evening, or where they're even going to sleep, because they don't even own a bed.
In a G7 nation.
We are the 6th largest economy on the planet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if that's not a social contract that has been flushed down the river along with all of our sewage, I do not think I would ever encounter a bigger obscenity. But that's what we're dealing with.
And right now, do you see, obviously we've got a new government in power, so we have to at least say, well, okay, there's the possibility of change or the potential of change. How optimistic are you that that we're on a better trajectory now?
Well, listen, quite clearly, I could say what the budget yesterday was all about was actually winning the next election in 5 years' time.
Right.
Because clearly I see, and I think most people see in the reaction that I've seen, and my own belief. Now, we all knew it was coming. We are in a desperate state. We are, as a nation, being driven by 15 years of dogma at a place where society is on the verge of collapse. In the run-up to the election, and I'll put my own cards on the table here, I'm president of an organisation called SEARA. That's the Labour Environment Campaign Group. And in the run-up, I personally visited 64 constituencies, campaigning for Labour candidates. In fact, I ended up endorsing about 86 different Labour candidates who are also members of SEARA.
Yeah.
So I've got recent kind of hands-on knowledge of what the world out there looks like, from Scotland to the deepest, darkest corners of Cornwall. It's grim out there. It really is properly grim. It's going to take an enormous amount of fixing. I think some people could be bolder. I think they could be more imaginative. I think I'm still waiting for that vision to appear.
Right.
Because it's not my original thinking, but ultimately the only task we need from politicians is that they give us hope.
Yeah.
That tomorrow will be better than yesterday, and next week will be better than last week, and next year is going to knock last year well out of the park. And I'm not seeing that real belief and that strength yet that it will get better. What I'm still seeing is there's going to be a lot of pain and agony for another 3 or 4 years. I can get away with that. I can live through anything because, you know what, I have other options in my life. But having seen what I've seen out there, really on the streets, I'm not sure picking a fight with everybody's grandmother over 300 quid fuel bill was actually the right fight to be taken.
No.
Not right now.
Do you still want a public inquiry, Feargal, into the water thing?
Oh, I think there's bloody well should be. Because
statutory, the full 9 yards, the whole thing.
Absolutely. I think there's an awful lot of people out there that held public office
Yeah.
that actually should be prosecuted for malfeasance and malpractice in public office. And I'm talking specifically about the boards of Ofwat and the boards of the Environment Agency. And I think the Corporation and the Companies Act and Environment Law should be actually enforced proactively and retrospectively.
Because
the statute of limitations does apply.
It does.
Were you a director of a water company at any point in the last 6 years? Good. We're going to see you in court.
I mean, it does seem that if you go back over the great list of social disasters and catastrophes of the last 50, 20 years, very few people have been, convicted, let alone gone to jail.
Oh, listen, absolutely. And that's why...
going back to the financial crash,
Ironically enough, the only people I can find that were even prosecuted under disrupting, blocking, preventing an Environment Agency investigation were 3 relatively minor junior members of Southern Water.
There you go.
Now, what happened was, as you will all remember, 2-3 years ago, Southern Water was fined £90 million for openly admitting thousands of occasions of illegally dumping sewage. Now, the only reason I know about these employees, they appealed it all the way to the first tribunal, to the employment tribunal, and it all came out. They were being ordered by their bosses, by their company's lawyers, to take evidence packs away from the Environment Agency officers and to lock them in cabinets, to put them in company vans and to block and disrupt that investigation. It's the classic case of there has to be a fall guy. Yeah. It'll be 3 junior members. It'll be 3 people working the sewage works that are totally expendable. And who do we care? Well, what did their line boss know, and what did his boss do, and what did the director know, and how much of this actually did the chief executive and therefore the directors of Southern Water ever know, or what kind of culture they'd created that somewhere down the management line they thought they could order junior employees to take evidence packs that they had put diaries and records into, sealed evidence bags, and they take them back from the EA and to lock them away. That's outrageous.
I mean, that's seriously criminal behaviour, isn't it?
Well, clearly somebody in senior management ordered these people to do it. They owned up in the employment tribunal. They were on the phone to their bosses and been ordered. This is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
I have reason to believe, scurrilous accusation, that similar things go on to this day. And indeed, there's one allegation made to me a matter of days ago involving a very lengthy illegal sewage discharge bearing in mind these things are all fitted with monitoring systems. It's at a weekend. There's some field engineer on standby. He's got an alarm going off on his laptop, on his mobile phone. He's calling his boss and been told to reset the alarm.
No way.
And to reset the alarm, and to reset the alarm, and to reset the alarm. And several hours later, when they realised it was not going to be able to reset, they finally actually then admitted and owned up to the EA that the discharge had been happening.
But on the bright side, you have united the nation. It's a very interesting case, this, of social injustice, because we live in a very polarised world, not just in this country, but everyone has some depth of feeling about it. I'm not saying it's uniform, but this is an issue that does unite people.
Listen, I can help you with it. In the run-up to the election, the polling data was showing that 59% of people were indicating that the sewage scandal would influence who they voted for at the election.
That's quite a figure.
69% of people then were saying they wanted the water industry renationalised.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now that SERA, and I can't claim kind of personal allegiance from all of them, but I think there are now 103, 104 SERA Labour MPs who, to some extent or other, all campaigned around the sewage scandal.
Yeah.
Add to that the 72 Lib Dem MPs, and the Lib Dems, this was central plank, and their policy. Ed Davey launched the whole campaign on Lake Windermere, illustrating the sewage scandal there, and just chucking the 5 or 6 Green MPs on that. So in very round numbers, you're looking at 180 backbench MPs that one way or another owe their election and their political careers to the sewage scandal. That cuts across politics like nothing has ever done before.
Serious base.
Correct.
It's a serious base.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up. Thank you for editing the New European.
Thank you for the opportunity.
But
thank you.
The real thank you.
Citizens.
The real thank you is for leading this charge.
Yeah.
It's so important.
That's incredibly kind of you.
And it's been an heroic effort, and I can hardly think of a precedent really where one man has galvanised everybody the way you have. It's extraordinary.
And also thank you for that signed Undertones CD you gave me for my birthday all those years ago, because you know a man's weaknesses when you see them. I treasure it still.
As a last word, when the organisations were signing up to the march, I did allow myself one incredibly small moment of quiet satisfaction, and that when somebody phoned me up and told me the Women's Institute has just signed up to take part and in support of the march.
Fantastic.
And I would caution every Prime Minister. It ended quite badly for a previous Prime Minister.
Never ever cross the WI.
Do not mess with the WI. So listen, folks, if you feel strongly about this, and I know you will, then if you're in London this weekend, all the details of the march will be in the links for the podcast. Turn up, bring the kids, bring the grandkids, show up and make yourself heard, because ultimately that's the only any of us have in really making sure that politicians listen to us. Feargal, thanks again for coming in.
Thanks so much.
It's been
glorious
wonderful
opportunity. Thank you so
All
much.
power to your elbow.